All right, welcome to the 38th, I believe, meeting of the Vermont Tax Structure Commission. We are in the final week or so of this process. We worked our way to a final draft, which we posted for public comment a couple weeks ago. The public comment period has ended, and we are now incorporating what we heard in the public comment period and other feedback into what will become the final report, which we are scheduled to hand over to the legislature on Monday, February 8th. Would like to invite anyone who is listening in to send us questions or comments to participate in the discussion. The email to send those to is taxcommission@ledge.state.vt.us, taxcommission.leg.state.vt.us. First order of business is approval of the minutes of our previous meeting. Would someone like to move their adoption?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of their adoption, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. We have approved those minutes. So, we've got a few pieces that we're going to review and talk about how we incorporate them into the final report. Sean, were you planning to take a look at the status check?
We can. It's, if you want to pop it up, I just for consistency's sake, but it's getting pretty sparse. We're down to only 3 lines, not crossed out, 2 lines from before, and we added this new line because as of the last time we looked at this, we didn't have today's meeting. So we have today's meeting to debrief the Senate Finance and the other issues that have been raised regarding the public feedback, the proposed edits to chapters, recommendations, anything else you want to talk about. And then on Monday, coming Monday, 1 o'clock, is our tentative final meeting to resolve any outstanding issues. We'll look at Steve's draft responses to the feedback then, the compiled feedback. And if we have the green light, I'll begin the final copy editing, reading everything back through. As Bram noted, you did this week too. So shouldn't be many things to flag, but anything we'll send back out, and then we'll be ready to deliver by Monday the 8th. That's the schedule as I have it. If anyone sees anything missing or wants to discuss anything, you can. Otherwise, we can proceed.
Very good. Do we have a document? I saw Deb's responses to feedback. It incorporated a lot of the Senate Finance comments and questions. Is that the best piece to work off to look at Senate Finance?
Yeah. So I have 4 documents posted here. The one, Deb's proposed changes to Chapter 2 and timeline. That was the document she emailed the other day regarding that's just short. That's just I think about two pages. Just talking about breaking out language for breaking out the recommendations in Chapter 2 and change the language of the incident study and the advisory committee. We could knock that out first if you want. The more substantive document is the document that the changes you made, Bram, and that Deb added as well to the January 7 version. I presume that'll be a significant chunk of today's meeting, and then the draft response to the feedback that you and Deb both submitted are also up there. So I don't think there's anything, any specific document for the Senate Finance, but I know you all have kind of if you have an open discussion or points how you want to debrief on yesterday's discussion. We can take them however you'd like to take them.
Okay, well that's really helpful. Thanks. I unless someone has a different thought, I suggest we work through these documents in the order they are presented here. Is that okay with everyone?
I am in agreement with that.
Okay with me.
Let's do that then. All right. So Deb, do you want to lead this since you formatted this? This
Okay. So after our last discussion, we considered the possibility of moving the two studies that, well, actually, I think maybe we talked about only one or two, moving the studies up front ahead of the sort of our, actually, it's moving some horizontals ahead of the verticals or studies, because they're first in our timeline, and they're things that we got a lot of comments, I think, that were, don't do anything now, we're recovering from COVID. We also know that the legislature is focused on that. And so these are things that we can do ahead of time, before we launch into the other changes. They're also really things that are foundational to the subsequent recommendations. And so I thought the two were the tax incidence and benefit cliff study, and then the second one being the the Education Tax Advisory Committee. And then I thought, so the Education Property Tax Advisory Committee is part of recommendation 4 now. And we could bring all of recommendation 4 up, or we could pull that one piece out. So I sort of made 2 recommendations. And this is the second change in the, just want to make sure that in the timeline, we reflect the change that we made in terms of rental units, not changing them on the grand list, but we still need to analyze rental units and renters. But back to the first part, which is just the order of the recommendations. After I wrote this up, I thought maybe it would be easier to just move all of recommendation 4 up rather than pulling out the Education Tax Advisory Committee. And so in recommendation 1, this is exactly the same as it was in its old number, except that I thought about adding incidents in the title. I know it's getting longer and longer, except people like, for example, the Vermont Future Study, the chamber group that came,
Yes.
it's labeling it as an incident study. And some people don't really recognize when they read that title that we are talking about the same incident study that's been recommended before. So I just thought putting the word in there will help people recognize it. But there are no wording changes. And then the one underneath that, I slightly expanded the the Education Tax Advisory Commission wording. I should say I don't have strong feelings about this, that we pull these recommendations forward. I just felt that we want the legislature to start moving on things, and that's where they should start. And people don't seem to recognize that we have recommended that in the timeline.
Yeah, I guess one question we're trying to answer here is, should our recommendations, the summary of recommendations, be in the order in which we are recommending they be implemented, or
Yeah.
should they be in order of importance?
Right.
And I think we can probably, in the summary, it's pretty easy to say, these are listed in the chronological order in which we recommend they be implemented, not necessarily in order of complexity or importance.
Or we could do it the other way. I mean, we could use that first paragraph to say, we recognize because of COVID that the major changes aren't going to happen this year. So these two recommendations are important to tackle first.
Yeah, I think, my instinct is that we should make it easy for people, and laying these out in chronological order would do that. And in fact, in the summary of recommendations, we could even add, we could bring a little bit of the timeline into the summary of recommendations, in terms of, this biennium, second biennium, third, fourth, or, years or something. And, the first 2-3 recommendations are first biennium and then second. And I think, again, the more consistent we are and the more intuitive we make it, the better for our readers.
So are you recommending then chronological order?
That's what I think. What do you guys think?
That works for me.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Bram, because intuitively, if you're reading something, recommendation number 1, if I wasn't part of the commission, I might think that recommendation number 1 was the most important and should be done first. So I think I'm in agreement with you, Bram.
Yeah, I think that the next question that would raise, and I think there's a lot of merit to doing it that way too, would be kind of looking at how you have the timeline and kind of with those 2 recommendations, as you say, put at the top of the list, they could be initiated right away. That kind of solves that what's formerly recommendation number 4, and then I think 1, 2, and 3 slot into place. They align with the way you lay out in the timeline chapter. Recommendations 5 through 8 then become a question mark. 5 has the portion of it that's related to the Property Tax Advisory Committee. That's obviously dealt with there, but I guess the rest of it, and more so than those smaller ones, the telecommunications tax policy for climate change, and then collaborating with other states. Do you think just leaving those there in 6, 7, and 8, and just kind of noting for parallel purposes that they aren't pegged to a particular biennium because they're more general advice that you're giving rather than a particular change? Is that how you would see those falling out?
I guess my take would be that we don't then pull in the particular biennium into this part, but we do say that they're in chronological order and explain, that we understand that the legislature isn't going to make, the big changes this year, but do some of the background work, foundational work. And I have a question here on, so I don't have this in front of me, but the Education Tax Advisory Committee was part of 5, recommendation 5, Sean?
Yes, that's correct.
So, I guess that would be my question. Do we bring all of 5 up?
Well, I think, we're not married to this specific number of recommendations.
Yeah.
So if we want to, tease out some of these things and make them separate recommendations, one which goes up top and one which goes, if part of it has to happen at the beginning and part of it makes sense later on, then maybe the thing to do is separate those.
Yeah, I think just looking at them
Okay.
in here, I think there would be some value to separating them, particularly since you're framing the Education Tax Advisory Committee as something that can be done immediately, even in the pandemic. And then the other three components, it's not like they're huge lifts, but I think there's reasons to believe they might take more than the current half of the biennium to do. Just for reminder's sake, they're number one, moving expenditures from mental health services and employee health insurance from the ed fund to the general fund. Second, developing the program at PVR to appraise large or complicated properties and defend appraisals, and then finally study alternatives to the CLA. So I think that you certainly could, leaving them in their 5 slot, or I guess if they're bumped down, they become 6 and there's now 9. Those others may make sense in that way. And then it really elevates and keeps the spotlight on the advisory committee in number 1 or 2, which I think is what you wanted.
I actually, as you say it, Deb, I agree. We shouldn't label them with specific biennia, but a kind of introductory paragraph to the summary of recommendations saying that these are in the order in which we recommend they be undertaken, because the earlier recommendations are foundational to the later ones. And then we can lay it out. We can lay out a proposal by biennium in the timeline. And, if they want dates in a more rigid structure, they can go there to find it, but doesn't need to be.
Okay.
That all makes sense to me.
Me too.
Sounds good to me.
Great. So Deb had a good introductory paragraph there. If you'd like, I could take a stab at, adding a sentence or just bringing in that chronological part.
That would be great.
You can all obviously take a look and change it however you like, but I'll take a stab at that and get it in the draft ahead of Monday.
Thank you. That's great.
And I'll also slot these in this order. So we'll have 9 recommendations now. And I think in Deb's email, Deb, you had to kind of ask the question of whether the advisory committee should be recommendation 1 or the incident study be recommendation 1, and you did it in this order. Is this the order you think would be best? And everyone does it. Incidents number 1 and advisory committee number 2.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have strong feelings. I think
Me neither.
the way it is fine.
That sounds great. Good. So I think we can dig into the big document now. And I think most of the edits here were yours, Bram. So I don't know if you want to drive on that part, and then we can jump to Deb's or do them as you get.
Steve, before you jumped on, we were commenting on the fact that you have this combination of the intense end of this process plus the intense beginning of a new job, and we are sympathetic to your situation. So I take it, Steve, that you did not have time to go through these 130 pages?
That is correct.
All right.
I mean, I've, if you referred to the entire draft, yes, I have, but not with Deb's edits and your edits.
Yeah, I meant this particular one with my stuff in it. So, okay, so we'll go through, and we're actually not at the top here, are we? And let me ask you this, actually, Sorsha, can you share hosting with me so that I can scroll through?
I can make you a host and you'll have to pull up the document again. You won't be able to share this one. Would you like to do that?
Let me think for just a sec. The one I have, do I have a copy with Deb's comments?
Deb emailed
Yeah.
it. You could also go to the webpage, Bram, if you have the meeting agenda and supporting documents open, you could open in the supporting documents of the commission webpage of the January 29th meeting.
Yeah, okay, so yes, Sorsha, I will pull it up on my screen, and if you can make me a co-host, I will share and pull that up.
You all set?
Thank you. All right. Here we go. Share. All right. Okay. You see the report, people?
Yes, we do.
Yep.
Excellent. So I'll just go and stop whenever there's a meaningful thing. So I mentioned in my email the issue of community goods versus public goods. I'd started off calling education and healthcare and musical events and all those things community goods. Someone said, hey, public goods is the right term, and I switched to that, and then realized that actually has a pretty specific definition, and what we wanted to talk about was broader than that, so I switched back throughout. So here, Steve, I just added a paragraph in the introduction which says there was a period of public comment. We got lots of good feedback. We're grateful for it, and it is included along with our responses in Appendix 1-2.
Mhm.
In this paragraph, simply stating the fact that we were not charged with looking at spending, and that we heard a lot about it, and we are grateful to the legislature for dealing with spending. And let's see, just hyphens, and whether a house site exemption could offset the regressivity of the property tax without necessitating an income-based adjustment, and we found it could not. Instead of it found, we could not. So,
But by the way, Bram, in recommendation number 2 there, I don't know if anybody watched the governor's press conference today. That was one of the questions from, I think, Stewart from Channel 5. So we heard that you're contemplating broadening the sales tax base. What can you tell us about that?
I bet he was not pleased to get that question.
He basically said that as far as he's concerned, he still does not want, he would entertain the idea if it were to not raise the burden on Vermonters, but rather spread it out.
Okay.
So we'll see.
He's aligned.
Yeah, great.
To have the governor aligned. All right. So I guess I just added to keep it parallel with the sales tax, added the fact that the recommendation in broadening the provider tax base is to also lower that rate. Since the rates are all over, it's lowering it on most categories, but we'll raise it a little on some. So I said lower than the current average rate, just to make it accurate. A few little words and typos and stuff. This one is right. So this reflects the separating of Chapter 7 and the new Chapter 8, and not trying to merge sales tax and provider tax, but treating them separately. It was a brave effort. That's all I want to say about it. And, I think the goal is to eliminate tax and benefits cliffs. And actually, I should have deleted a few other words here. Steepness of. I think we can just shorten this. Find ways to eliminate tax and benefit cliffs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's gone in my version. I'm following along with the word version, Bram. So I'll make any edits as we go.
That's great. Thanks, Sean. Okay. Oh, all these lovely pages without a single correction that we can zip by. Okay, so someone brought up in public comment the point that if we add a road use fee to electric car registration, that doesn't help with electric cars zipping in from out of state, running around on our roads and not buying gasoline. So I just added a few words saying this is a first step, and we do acknowledge there needs to be a mechanism for capturing those as well. Actually, I think the phrase that Deb first used when we first talked about this that struck me was, instead of a race to the bottom, maybe we can meet in the middle. So actually, Sean, can we change this word move to meet?
Sure. Yep.
I'd actually like to move the middle. This is more in response to the futures report that said they wanted us to move to the middle, and I'd rather move the middle.
Oh, okay. So let's leave that. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that nuance, but that's great. Rather than racing to the bottom together, we may be able to move the middle. Okay.
Yep.
We just hadn't mentioned these principles earlier, I think, as I read it from beginning to end. So to, just make it clear to people who don't know this stuff, what we're talking about, I just added of a high quality tax system. And
So wait, did we mention NCSL, what that is then?
So we did, yes.
Okay.
We did.
But I'll put it back in here too. I think when I went through and the edits acronyms last time, tried to spell it out the first time it was mentioned in each chapter. So I can do that here as well, if all of you agree. I think just doing it that way with a long document, in case people are reading it at different points, you don't need it redefined always.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Thank you. All right. Right. So just adding a few words of clarification that this will be revenue neutral within the sales tax, not affecting other parts of the system. This again, just reiterating the point that the state can have stable revenue, but that implies volatile rates for the taxpayers, or the state can have stable rates for the taxpayers but volatile revenue. It's very difficult to have stability on both ends.
But you get criticized either way.
That is true. Someone gets seasick wherever the volatility is. So these two paragraphs just accidentally got copied from right here. So they were just repeated fully in word for word. So they're good paragraphs, but I don't think we need them twice.
Good, but not that good.
And right, so I just added the fact that the Green Tax Shift for Vermont report was overseen by the Gund Institute at the University of Vermont, and that institute's Vermont Green Tax and Common Assets Project Just to give full credit where credit was due, full attribution. So stuff in red is stuff you added, Deb, is that right?
No,
This figure 4 data from the U.S. Internal Revenue Service. Who added that? Let's see. If I hover over it, will it tell us?
I don't have that red in mine. It's, oh, there was an issue. That showed up in some version and I wondered why. So maybe it's been, Sean, did you put it in one of those things where it pulls in a title automatically in the right place? And it pulled in this whole long title?
Yeah, I may have. Looking at it, I didn't automatically, but the reference was in there. I think when I set it up to the figures. So
Maybe what
that was edited today, but I did. But maybe if
so, maybe we just want this to say as shown in figure 4 below.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Because the attribution is down there below it. And in this table, I just added dollar signs and changed the word percent to the percent sign to make it all clear and easier to read. Zipping happily along. The effort of the Multi-State Tax Commission to, it felt to me like there was a missing word there.
Yeah.
The Multi-State Tax Commission to clarity and consistency. So I added to increase clarity and consistency, which I think is the intent of the sentence. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is just removing healthcare provider tax from the places where we separated it out and turning public to community. Again, except healthcare and removing the provider tax pieces. And just clarifying that low-income Vermonters will benefit from a reduction in the things they currently, not on everything they currently buy, but on everything they currently pay sales tax on. So I just made that a little clearer. Separating out the provider tax into a separate discussion changed these numbers. I will take a minute to add a side note here, which is I heard back from, is Nolan Langweil JFO or is he tax?
Yeah, he's JFO.
JFO. Heard back from him. He did a thorough parsing of the provider tax calculator and offered some great suggestions. So I will be doing one last version of that, which I will post, and it'll change the provider tax rate that we recommend a bit. You know, he pointed out, for instance, that the provider tax rate actually has a pretty low compliance rate, and you know, hospitals sometimes just don't pay for a couple of years and so forth. So he suggested putting in like a 0.75 factor on everything to be safe. So that'll change things a little bit.
But doesn't that make it even more clear that that's a crazy tax?
I think it does, in fact. So this is all just correcting those numbers with the provider tax language and numbers pulled out of the sales tax piece. And just forgot a word there, which I put back in. On to ed tax reform. And I think there are many, many pages here that neither Deb nor I touched. So words locally voted were sort of orphaned here at the end, and I think they were supposed to go right there.
looks fine to me.
Yeah, I asked Deb to check that and she said it looked right. So there's that. And then, okay, so these red, is this another, this is another instance of what happened above? And we
Yeah,
don't,
they must. I can go through and check them all. It must be. I'm not sure how that popped up that way, but it's, I did set them to automatically populate, but I
Yeah.
thought just with the figure 13s, because figured if we added another figure, then they'd all be thrown off. But I'm not sure why it pulled in the full text
Yeah.
below, but
Okay.
I'll clean all that up.
same fix there and same fix here, I guess. Okay. All right, so is this is one of your additions, right, Deb? You're in purple. Whether they are actually education costs?
Oh, yeah. You did question, maybe, I'm not sure if this is the time, but I think as a result of Cynthia Browning's, her letter to us, that you questioned, should we strengthen this section? And my sense is that, yes, also Liz commented that in Burlington, they have people, the school system has people helping the English language learners who actually end up being the connection with the whole family and the community. So that they're, providing all sorts of services that aren't education.
Yes.
So it's more than the ones that we just picked out. Mental health, for example, is one that, wasn't education. And we did recommend that health insurance be taken out. But I think Cynthia Browning's big question was, she felt that the taxes that would be paid on land that's enrolled in the use value appraisal program that are not paid to the ed fund because we're actually taxing them based on their value for agriculture or forestry. She wanted that differential to, I guess, be paid into the ed fund from the general fund. In other words, she was looking at it as an expense of the education fund. But when you read the statute carefully, it very clearly says that the education fund shall be made up of the education tax on the fair market value of property that's taxed at fair market value, and the use value of property that's enrolled in the use value appraisal program. So it's very clear that it's a revenue, that is the revenue that's specified to go into the ed fund. And so therefore there's no expense to take out.
Wow. So her, I mean, I admire the fact she does not mince words and accuse
I
us
do
of
too.
accuse us of both intellectual and moral failure on this point. But it sounds as though per statute she's misreading or misunderstanding, and we're on solid ground. Is that your sense?
Yes, I don't think that she's she has a good point. That's the way that she looks at it. And but I think statutorily we're in the right place. And she thinks differently, and she brings up really good, thoughtful issues. But that one is sort of mischaracterized, I think, according to the way the statutes are. So I don't recommend making any change to that to recognize the use value issue.
Great. And this little paragraph is okay with you, Steve?
Yes. And my feeling on that too is to further back what Deb said. That seems like it's a more of a policy and procedural issue that the legislature would have to look at a change to the law as opposed to a change to the tax structure.
Right.
That's a really good point. You know, I just added a comma here after this delightful little historical color that Deb added. Times have changed since Vermont towns began electing citizens to serve as fence viewers, listers, and I added the comma there, and weighers of coal, because people unfamiliar with it might think that it's one person who is a lister and weigher of coal. So I wanted to clarify that. This, by the way, this
benefits.
this 120-year-old house I'm in with the chimney that I'm going to get rid of had a coal furnace to begin with, and when I moved in, there are bits and pieces of the old coal furnace in the basement, and I've got a little can of coal chips that I swept up out of the corners.
I find coal when I dig in my garden sometimes. Pieces of burned out coal, I guess.
Yeah. All right. So, so you added this sentence, Deb?
I'm sorry, what page are you in?
I'm sorry, I'm on page 60 under enumerated .7. It says the school district budget vote would determine the local income tax rate based on spending per equalized pupil. Then you added a new sentence. This rate would apply to the income of all residents. There would not be different income brackets as there are in the personal income tax.
That was in response to one of Sean's comments that we weren't clear.
Yeah, I think just from the discussion, both in Senate Finance and House Ways and Means, where they were asking about some of the details, you know, whether it be a progressive rate or so. Yeah, I think this heads off that question that came up in those settings, and good to lay it out there.
Good.
Can we go back up to 59 though, Bram?
Of course. Oh yes, right here. I'm sorry, I blew right past that.
So I made this change because it's really sort of confusing what we do right now. We have a yield that equals 2% of your income. So we can just drop the 2% and have a yield. So all you do is divide by the yield and you come up with the percent of your income. So right now we have to divide by 2, you know, and I realized like when you look at that, it's not intuitive, and we want it to be really simple and intuitive. So I would make that change in the other ones that we also have. I also thought I can very easily bring it up a year so that it's the year that we're looking at right now, and do that for the other alternatives too. So no content change, just
got it.
Update. Okay.
So Deb, on that last part, so you mean change it where it's change it to say income as of December 31st, 2020, filed in April 2021. Is that what you're?
Yeah, and FY22.
Yeah, and then say spending per pupil FY22, yields FY22. Okay.
Yep.
Sure, I can do that for this in the appendices. Yeah.
All right, then there's a little clutch of changes to numbers and so forth here, Deb, on the bottom of page 60.
Yeah, so this is rebate, and Sean suggested that we give it more definition. And so I just did, for example, people could pay 20% of the district rate if their income's below $10,000. That's fairly equivalent to our current rebate, but our current rebate just cuts them off at a certain point. And then Sean suggested we go 20% below 10,000, rising to 80% at 47,000, and what was the last one that you had, Sean?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the
100%
number
at,
they just said they're 100% at 60,000. And I mean,
yeah,
I was just putting, I wasn't putting words in that for you. I was more thinking that if you were talking about a 2.5% rate overall, and right now people who are under 47,000 pay 2%, you're talking about them paying 80%. So if you basically want to hold them harmless, that refund that group would be 80%. And I guess, like you say, with the 20% below the 10,000, that equates to the 0.5%, right, of current law. And then so the last phrase I had in there, and again, I was just trying to look at, you obviously don't specify what the formula is or exactly what that smoothing will be from the 20% to the 47, and you certainly don't have to. But I think I thought 60,000 was roughly where it would hit the 100% mark. I didn't really, I didn't break out any formula in Excel or anything, but it just seemed like if you're crossing, if you're going at 80% in the 40s, probably somewhere around 60,000 is where you might hit 100%, depending on what the slope of that line is. And as you said, I mean, the other question there is for the hold and harmless that I flagged is just, if you're setting up a situation, whereas it's different, I guess, as Cynthia Browning and others raised in the feedback, that our current system disincentivizes shared housing by going to income. You're moving away from some of that in a sense, because you're not doing household income anymore. You're doing everybody on their AGI, and if everybody's at 2.5%, it isn't impacted. But once you put in this rebate, you're then setting up a situation where it would be treated differently by, so somebody, so if like two people in a household both making $30,000, they would be incentivized to file separately so that they could pay 1.5%, whatever, rather than the 2.5% of the household income at 60. But as you noted, you guys had talked about that before and decided not to get into it, so can just leave that piece open if you think that's the way.
So two things here. The first is that Sean's recommending that we add one other thing, saying and 100% at 60,000, and that's fine with me. My sense is that it's really premature to set these figures. That is basically, we're just saying we don't want you to just say if you that you don't have any, you're not affected if you vote in a budget that's way high. Everybody sees their tax bill go up. So that's why we're suggesting using percentages. And I think that our suggestion is just an example that happens to be really close to the current situation. But the second part about filing status is your filing status now doesn't affect your rebate. And so whatever we decide, if it's AGI or if it's household income, then the rebate would follow that same decision. And up above, we said something about, we recommend using AGI and not adjusting for household size or exemptions, but we recognize that a good argument could be made for doing that. And I think that would just follow through. Whatever we decide up there determines how the rebate's handled. So I don't think we have to repeat we don't have to complicate this with filing status or exemptions or anything. So I would just go with adding Sean's first example. First, so we have 20%, 80%, 100%.
Yeah, that's fine with me. I mean, it says, great. It says for example, so hopefully everyone will read it as a as an example.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay,
Help with the-
chugging happily along. Consumption tax. So everything here, I think almost everything is revising it to make the chapter on sales tax. You know what the way I redid it
Sorry,
was,
yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Bram. I just had one other question on that. I realized too, is because you're the recommendation is for everybody, owners and renters, to pay their just start yeah, right on 59 where we have that example where you say, for example, homeowners could pay. Wouldn't it just be, for example,
Oh.
filers? Because
Yeah.
it's everybody.
Yeah, it would be
Good
fine.
point. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll do for example, filers could pay. All right, you can go back to the other
Yeah.
piece. Sorry for the interruption.
that's a great catch, Sean. Thank you.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so almost everything in here is separating out the provider tax. And, you know, what I did was kind of went through the sales tax chapter as it was up to the point where it hits healthcare and the conclusion that healthcare is not amenable to sales tax. And sort of then took the whole rest of the healthcare discussion about the provider tax and pulled that all out into the new chapter 8. So this tax is now, the vast majority of it is just sales tax. Provider tax is handled in the next one. And, you know, just adjusted some of, you know, every time I read this, I find bits of judgmental language that I am not proud of. So I have removed as much as I can that and made it less opinionated and more objective. Just forgot a word there. And just again, reading it through, having not read it beginning to end in a while, just there were a few structures that felt it would read more smoothly or it would be clearer or whatever. So I just, you know, no changes to content, just changes to presentation there. I don't like the repetition of some words there, so I just changed words. Change the name of the calculator to the sales and provider tax calculator, since those are now on 2 different tabs. Some of the feedback I got said I pointed out that I hadn't been particularly careful about differentiating between exemptions and exclusions, so I was just did that. Recognize those as 2 different categories of tax expenditure. Community versus public, we talked about. And you know, it wasn't very long ago that we got the 2021 Tax Expenditure Reviews. So I read that and was happy to see that the in-depth review of clothing and footwear, the recommendations were consistent with what we recommended. They sort of said this is not an efficient way to do it. So I've just added some quotes and some information from that fresh report in the spots that were appropriate. And addressed one of the concerns they raise, which was if we tax clothing, there'll be more people going to New Hampshire to buy clothing and to New York because they have either no sales tax or New York's got a partial exemption. But you know, going through their full argument, that report went on to say it presented some options, including repealing the exemption in its entirety and replacing it with a more targeted income tax credit, such as, and I just quoted the report since it was consistent with what we had recommended.
I just want to make a quick comment, not an editorial change, but the rationale that people will go to New York or they'll go to New Hampshire to buy their clothing. That would be a case to repeal the entire sales tax system, because people, I believe that if you're going to buy a pair of jeans, or even you're going back to school shopping, spend $200 or $300, I don't know that you're going to go that far over the border to save the sales tax on clothing. However, it may be worth your while if you're buying that $3,000 or $4,000 TV for the Super Bowl. Those are the types of things that people are going to continue to do anyway. So I'm glad you put in what you put in, but I don't buy the argument that, certain exemptions need to stay because of going over across the border.
I agree. And, I think, I don't know, when we were working on carbon tax, it was really interesting. They looked at gas on both sides of the border, and even though Vermont's taxes are a lot higher, the gas price tends to be the same on the New Hampshire side of the border, because those guys just raise their price to match the Vermont price because they can make more money. So, there isn't a huge amount of cross border for gasoline, at least that one specific thing I saw the data on. And I, added the refrain about protecting low-income Vermonters and doing so in a way that helps weekly cash flow. Community versus public. Having messed around with the rate from 3.6 to 3.8 and 3.4, I kept, having to change these numbers. Community, public. I talked here about effective use of the tax code. Having said the sales tax isn't a great tool, I did want to acknowledge where it is. So the excise tax to discourage smoking, and I just added a second note noting that the earned income tax credit has, in the last 30 years or whatever it's been, has been effective at reducing poverty. Oh, there's a page where I liked everything I wrote. Just change the name of this subject, getting rid of all the provider tax and all the other healthcare stuff out of it, and simply, we're going through this happily, deciding we can tax everything. We get to applying the sales tax to healthcare, and didn't change anything. I just added a new introductory sentence here. And, just sort of said, well, a lot of reasons to not include healthcare. We'll start off with access for low-income Vermonters. And someone had pointed out that low-income Vermonters, someone in public comment said, hey, they're not fully insulated for the cost of all healthcare. Some they are, some they aren't. So I made that less absolute, partially insulated from some healthcare services in a number of ways, just to make it more accurate. And so it sort of goes up to here, to the point where in the old version, where we got to the conclusion that you can't apply the sales tax to healthcare, and then all the rest of it I just pulled straight out and stuck it in the new Chapter 8, which honestly I think was an improvement in kind of both the logic and the strength of the recommendations, and the balance of the chapters, because in a sales tax, consumption tax chapter, this was an overwhelmingly large discussion of health insurance taxing. So I think made it better in a lot of ways. So again, just pulling out the language around provider taxes from this chapter. And no changes in any of this. again, just adding a quote from the Tax Expenditure Reviews that supported and braced up our recommendation. Vermont is only one of 7 states to offer preferential sales tax treatment to clothing, and one of only 3 states with a full exemption without price threshold or different rates. So let's see. Yeah, there was this discussion about, hey, do you guys really want to be in the business of deciding what's good and what's bad? Groceries are good, candy's bad. How about soda? But taking a step back, it occurred to me that actually much of what the legislature does is making these judgment calls about what's good and what's bad. And they are, in fact, in that business. So, I just sort of softened that to say, that there is a way in which the legislature won't have to devote as much time to making decisions about what's good and what's bad relative to the sales tax. And this is a discussion of should there be a $150 limit, clothing below that exempt, clothing above that taxed. And I talked about the fact that on the border between those, you actually may start changing consumer behavior and getting people to buy stuff that they don't really want because they don't want to pay the tax on something they really do want, and that they, drawing the same conclusion that it is better to include as much as possible in the base. So, ripped out the provider tax pieces. There was a bunch of questions and public feedback about double taxation. People saying, hey, so if I go to a restaurant and I pay the meals tax, am I going to pay the sales tax on the service if you've expanded that to include service? So kind of my response to that is no, the meals tax wraps up the food and the service. It gets all of it. So we are wanting to keep these separate, not apply to avoid double taxation. Meals and rooms was one example that was brought up. So I addressed that specifically here. Someone else said, hey, if I pay on streaming services, do I pay the sales tax and the telecoms tax? And again, I think the answer is no. Is that correct? That we don't want to do that?
Yeah, I don't think our intention is to double tax something.
Yeah.
But you also have to look at how the tax is being billed. I mean, looking at straight, like your example on the meals tax, or even regular sales tax. Right now, if you provide goods and a service and you do not break them out, the entire thing is taxable for sales tax purposes. So it really only, for those people that do specifically bill, it only adds the service as a taxable item. So there wouldn't be any double taxation. And I think, we'd have to look at specific, I don't know if you want to just add, if a service is subject to another tax by the state of Vermont, that may be grounds for that particular service to be exempt from sales tax.
Great. I added a sentence here. We note that it is not our recommendation to add a sales tax to categories that are subject to other consumption taxes, like the meals and rooms tax. We also recommend avoiding double taxation. A service like Netflix should not be subject to both a telecom tax and a sales tax.
That covers it.
Great. A couple people also brought up the issue of the local option tax. And I think we heard this from House Ways and Means saying, geez, 1% on 6%, like that's only a small portion, but 1% on 3.6, now the local option tax is a bigger portion. I don't really see that as a problem per se. There is this issue that, and I don't know if it's an issue, but for towns that have the local option tax, expanding the sales tax to include services, that 1% doesn't go down. So, they're going to go from charging 1% on a smaller base to charging 1% on a broader base. So the towns are going to raise more revenue from the local option tax. Is that bad? I don't know. Our friend Karen Horn would say, no, that's great. But I did add a paragraph here that says one last important issue: over a dozen Vermont towns have a local option sales tax of 1%, making the sales tax in those towns 7%. If we reduce the state sales tax to 3.6% and expand the base, in those towns, the rate will drop from 7% to 4.6%, and goods and services that are not currently subject to the sales tax, like groceries, will be subject to a 4.6% sales tax. We do not believe the additional 1% makes a material difference to our recommendations, but it will require careful analysis to ensure that we are not causing any unintended issues in those towns. And
I think that that's good, but I think part of this is something that's sort of out of our scope, but I believe that the process for creating the local option tax is difficult and it requires legislative approval. I think it requires a charter change. So making a change to this, it's not clear how you can make a change to the local option tax without going through this whole process again.
You look slightly troubled, Sean.
Well, no, one of the questions I was just trying to think, like operationally on that, is so say I'm a carpenter based out of Williston. You would pay the sales tax where the service is performed, not where you're based out of, right? So if I build a house in Williston, because they have the 1% option tax, I would give 1% to Williston. But if I build a house in, I don't know, say Huntington, I don't think Huntington has an options tax, right? They would just pay the 3.6%. And similarly, if I was a carpenter based in Huntington, I would just charge 3.6% on, or remit 3.6% in towns where I do construction that don't have the tax, and then the extra 1% in the towns that do. Is that the way it would work?
That's the way it works now. So presumably that's the way it would stay. It's the destination of the service of the good. So that's why Vermont makes it easy for vendors to actually be able to, because they're set up. If let's say you're a vendor from out of state, your tax matrix shows by zip code who has a local options tax and who doesn't. So it would be the same thing. So you're right. A carpenter that's based in Huntington, if he does work on a home in Williston, it would be 4.6%. Everywhere else, it would be 3.6%. And that record keeping, by the way, is no different than it is now, because they still, if they're charging sales tax on the materials, they're still supposed to comply with the local options tax.
Got that? So I know you're kind of moonlighting as a carpenter there when you're done with public policy.
That makes sense. So, but I think that's where that feedback was coming from, where they said with the unintended issues, I guess, was it the chamber that said that, or others, right? So all of a sudden, places like Williston that they'll still be getting 1% on everything they get 1% on now, and then they'll be getting 1% on a whole bunch of other stuff. So they'll be getting an additional windfall. And I think, as League of Cities and Towns said, that may not be a problem, right? They could use that to lower their muni property tax or to do other things with it. But it was,
Yeah, I was just thinking.
There, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just thinking that actually that might provide a nice buffer to prevent. People have said, "Oh, well, you drop the property tax and half the towns are just going to see capacity and crank it back up." And for those 12 or 15 towns, it may provide a little bit of a buffer where they get more cash, so they're not as tempted to dial the property tax back up. So if we're okay with that paragraph.
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure about if we want to say anything about whether we can, what the approval process would be. In other words, the towns had to figure out what they wanted to do and have a vote and present it to the legislature, and the legislature had to go through this charter change process. And are we just saying, oh, well, it's going to change?
Right. So you're getting at those dozen towns, or that gap between the dozen or so towns that get the huge windfall, and then all the other towns, many of them that never bothered going for it because they don't have stores and shopping centers and things to reap a benefit from a sales tax on goods, all of a sudden would be able to potentially get revenue from a sales tax on services. But it's not so easy just to say they want to do it. They have to go through that whole charter change and legislative approval. Is that what you're getting at, Deb? Whether to address that directly in the
well, I guess what I'm getting at is that so they had to go through this process to set up what they currently set up, and get the charter change and it's a complicated approval process. And are we just changing this without going through the approval process again? Are we are we offering them an option? Or maybe we should just say something like that the legislature would have to look at the approval process.
I don't quite understand the concern, because I don't think the town has to do anything, right? They've got a charter that says they get 1% on top of the sales tax. And I think that automatically flows to the expansion of the sales tax.
Yeah, I guess the question is that fair? Is that right?
Is it right for them? Well,
I guess they're
piggybacking on state law now, right? In terms of what is taxed and what isn't. So I think they just continue to piggyback on state law, as it expands, contracts, changes.
I have a suggestion, maybe to satisfy both sides. The legislature should also monitor the local options tax fairness issue with an expanded base, and if needed, make the process to get a local option tax approved a little easier than it is now, or something like that. Is that kind of satisfy what you're thinking, Deb?
Yeah, I think if we just said that that the legislature could look at the approval and change the process for approving and changing the local option tax.
I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
is there any reason for the state legislature to be involved in a local town's decision whether or not to charge a local option tax?
Yes, because some towns don't have the tax base to do it. So the legislature makes them, some of their money goes, they don't get all the money. And so the legislature involved because of the fairness issue, but it does make it a really complicated process.
And legislative approval is needed to get a local option tax. South Burlington just went through an issue. They wanted to increase their local option tax based on the fact that the airport and rental cars and what have you, that Burlington is getting it, but they're not getting it because the airport supposedly is Burlington property.
Yeah.
So that became a whole issue. So I think I see what Deb is saying, not so much that the legislature can tell a local city or town that they should or shouldn't have a local option tax, but rather they are part of the process for a local city or town to request the ability to have it. And it's quite an arduous process at this point.
All right. So let's draft a sentence to add to the end of that paragraph.
What I had, what Deb just said was the legislature could look at the process for approving and changing the local options tax. You're thinking that would be right after the in those towns line or a new?
Yeah, no, I think right after in those towns, I think a new last sentence of that paragraph. And I'm sorry, can you read that again, Sean?
Sure. What Deb said, what I have here for now is that the legislature could look at the process for approving and changing the local options tax.
Does that capture the sense that you were getting at, Steve?
Yes, it does. Deb, does that
Fine with
work?
me, yep.
All right.
Great. I'll put it in there. You can always refine it again later if you want.
So, again, this is removing provider taxing, sales tax to everything except healthcare. Change, pulling out the provider tax, change some of these numbers. So I went through and changed those numbers. Same thing, pulling out provider tax, saying sales tax on everything except healthcare, changing the numbers, pulled out provider tax. I did add this again in response to, there were comments saying, hey, you're going to lower the rate and then the legislature is just going to crank it back up again. How does that do anyone any good? So I added this paragraph. As noted elsewhere, we believe this structure will improve simplicity, fairness, and sustainability/stability, regardless of the level of revenue raised. And if the legislature feels that our recommended balance leans too far toward rate lowering and not enough toward raising revenue, moving the sales tax to 4% and protecting low-income Vermonters would raise an additional $50 million a year versus our current system, and would still leave Vermont in the lowest tier of state sales tax rates. At 4%, Vermont would be one of 5 states with a 4% rate, with only 2 states with lower rates and 5 states with no sales tax, period. Is that an okay expansion?
Yep.
Yeah. And just to go back to your point, we can't draft our recommendations based on whether the legislature is going to raise the rate back up after they expand the base. That's like saying that we're responsible for educational spending on that side. That's way out of the purview, and anybody that's just a comment out of frustration and a lack of knowing what the scope of our work is. So
I think you're right. Okay. Called out a sentence I had about treating sales and provider separately, since that ended up being the right thing to do. And because we're not dealing with provider taxes anymore, I pulled out healthcare out of there. Added this paragraph.
Yeah, sorry, Bram, just one thing to flag. I think on the page after where you have that new paragraph about Vermont being one of 5 states, maybe 3 paragraphs after that, you have a paragraph it's not completely redundant, but similar. And it says it'll make Vermont's sales tax 3rd lowest among the 45 states. Maybe it's fine to still say it again, but you, I don't know if right where you have it there.
Yeah, I think, the one above sort of talks about what happens if we make it 4%.
Yeah,
This is,
so they are.
Yeah, they are a little different.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, find a leave.
Then I added this paragraph. We heard concern from the public that the expansion of the base is likely to be permanent, that lowering the rate of taxes is likely to be temporary, as a small increase in the low broad sales tax is an attractive source for increased revenue for the legislature. Again, our goal was to recommend a structure that's simple, fair, and sustainable regardless of the level of revenue the legislature decides to raise. Stated another way, a broad tax base is better than a narrow one at any level of sales tax. Whether the rate is 3.6% or 6%, a broad sales tax base is more fair, more stable and sustainable, and simpler than a narrow tax base. And, people did ask, there was one public comment about, gosh, you really want the person who teaches the occasional piano lesson to have to, record, calculate, collect, and remit sales tax. So I added this paragraph. We leave to the legislature to determine what constitutes a casual sale and that is exempt from the sales tax. There is a line between a one-time yard sale and a weekly flea market, but where a summer-long yard sale falls isn't clear to us. Similarly, there is some level of revenue per year below which any activity feels casual. Someone who makes a few $100s a year giving piano lessons I meant to say every other weekend. Can you add that word, Sean?
Yep. Yeah, got it.
Every other weekend to a couple of their neighbors' kids feels as though they are engaged in a more casual activity than someone who devotes a substantial amount of their time teaching piano to enough students to make $20,000 a year with that activity.
Agree with that.
All right. There's another page where I liked what I wrote. And there's another one. Man, I'm so good. Look at this. Page after page of perfection. All right. Chapter 8. Healthcare, provider taxes, the insurance premium tax, and health insurance claims assessments. And so this top part, I just pulled straight from what we had before. Someone, I don't remember who, but some helpful person who proofed this said, hey, Vermonters don't submit claims, the providers do. So I fixed that. And didn't quite make as strong a claim for the provider tax as being the functional equivalent. Said that gross receipts tax outside of healthcare are roughly similar to sales tax. And then this is the header that was the last one that remained up above in the sales tax. And then all of this is just purely copied from above, unchanged. So it just goes through provider taxes and the premium tax and the claims assessment and all of those things. So no changes to what it says, just where it says it. And that's the end of that. Here, Steve, you'd written general fund source of revenue in Vermont accounting for nearly 2/3, and then I think you'd added the actual percentages. And
Yeah,
felt redundant, so I
thank you.
that. Okay, great. Oh, now look at this. Steve's got a whole bunch of perfect pages in a row too.
Okay, don't go too fast on this one.
All right. So this was added, this sentence in purple.
Oh, that was a question for Steve.
Yeah. If you look at it if you look at it this way, Deb, yes, it escapes income taxation, but you've captured it in the estate tax by taxing the full fair market value at date of death.
So what about, so all I really wanted to do was show two sides of the argument. In other words, there's a perceived fairness, and then there's also perceived unfairness. But so maybe it could be something like, it results in appreciation escaping taxation unless
Escaping income taxation.
income taxation.
However, it is captured in the estate tax. And you
For
could
the-
you could also note that the income tax is 8.75% and the estate tax is 16%. So the further to that would be for estates that are not taxable.
Right.
True.
So maybe that's what it should say. It's also true that it results in appreciation escaping income taxation or escaping taxation unless the estate is subject to the estate tax.
Yeah, you could say it that way.
Okay. You
Sean?
got that, Sean?
Yeah, I got it. Yeah. So the sentence just says you have it, and then comma, unless the estate is
Subject to.
subject to the estate to the 16. Do you want me to say the 16% in there, or just?
Now to the Vermont estate tax.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Steve.
Mhm.
And here's
Okay,
another
stop.
one.
Is that true?
Okay, so this would be major change. It would eliminate the step up in basis. No, it's not. It does eliminate the step up in basis, but the reason it does that is not because it's taxed at the fair market value, but rather because it's taxed as if it were sold.
Right.
So the difference is if the analogy is I sell you my house for $100,000 gain, and it's not my primary residence. I have to pay tax on that $100,000 capital gain. When I die, if I die with my house having a $100,000 capital gain, that capital gain would be subject to the income tax in lieu of estate tax. That is how that works as a deemed sale.
Right. So
So if we change at fair market value to, it would eliminate the step up in basis as the estate property would be taxed as if it were sold. Would that make that accurate?
No, because it doesn't, because in a sale, if I sell you something that I have a basis for 200,000, if I sell it to you, Bram, for 400,000, your basis is 400,000. The concept that this form of taxation uses as a deemed sale is that if I die under those circumstances, I am on my final income tax return going to recognize that $200,000 capital gain and pay income tax on it. There would be no more quote unquote estate tax. So you can't say that it eliminates the step up in basis, because then somebody would say, well, gee, that's not fair. You're treating it as a deemed sale. What's the difference between if you sold it during your life and you sold it at death? I guess you could say it would eliminate the argument over step up in basis as as it is treated as a deemed sale on the decedent's final income tax return.
So it would eliminate the argument about the step up in basis, or about maybe we take the step up in basis terminology out of there, and it would eliminate the, it would tax the appreciation. Basically, the appreciated value would be therefore taxed.
Correct.
So it would eliminate the argument against about the step up in basis.
Right.
Bram, looks like you're sharing your Gmail.
Yeah, something happened.
Oh, yeah, okay. As long that's yours, Bram.
Yeah,
I have Gmail as well, and I'm like, wait a minute. I'm on my iPad because I couldn't get this on my work computer. How'd my Gmail get on my iPad?
So, yes, what am I? Okay, I'm there. Are we there? No, where are we?
Right there.
Right there. Okay. My apologies. Thank you.
No, you're just trying to make sure we're still awake, Bram.
Yeah.
Yes.
So on that purple, so Deb, you were rewriting that purple line there to take
Oh,
out the
boy.
step up. Say it would eliminate.
It would eliminate the escape from taxation of the appreciation because it is taxed as a deemed sale.
Maybe we could turn it around and say it would tax the appreciation
Yeah, you could do that.
because it would be deemed as because it would be treated as a deemed sale. And this would
This would eliminate property passing from generation to generation without taxing the appreciation.
okay.
You're good, Sean.
And no longer, so no longer have that phrase at the end of about the decedent's final income tax. Just have those two sentences there that it would tax the appreciation, be treated as a deemed sale, and it would eliminate escape from taxation, or it would eliminate property being transferred from generation to generation without taxation.
Without taxation of the appreciation on that property.
Perfect.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Of just effect versus effect.
Yep.
And I think
Finnegan.
Deb had said Finnegan spelled with an I.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got a few of those.
You look
Another-
at Joyce and you think Finnegan's Wake, but it's not the same.
That's very true. Okay, obsolete and inefficient. I think a bunch more perfect pages. So the timetable, given what we heard about COVID and the legislature's priorities and so forth, I'd sent an email saying, do we want to move the first big tax reform, property and education financing, to the next biennium, or at least to the next year? And I don't know how you all feel about that.
I think that's probably realistic, but I don't see any problem with setting it up this way because it is sort of giving, it is giving our chronology. It may take longer at any point, but I think this is okay.
Maybe what you do is where, at the top where it says timetable, we do understand, given the complexities the legislature faces due to the COVID pandemic, these may be pushed out a biennium. Because we didn't think that they were going to pay much attention to this report, and they've actually jumped all over the draft and talked to us. So surprisingly enough,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Just add, a brief note between the timetable, the 10-period timetable header, and the top of the actual table, saying we recognize that due to COVID, this may all be shifted out by 1 year. Or yeah, I think that's fine. So here, we want to remove this language, list rental units separately in the grand list.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah, that's gone.
excellent. And we've got create committee to monitor education, and so we've got those two things up front where we want them. All right, so are there any changes we want to make to the rest of this, or does it all roll out the way we had it? I think, right?
I think so. Again, it's up to the legislature. They may they may look at the consumption taxes and say, yeah, that's lower hanging fruit than the education property tax. We'll do that first, but that's in their purview. This is what we've recommended based on what we've been charged with, what the most important things we feel need to be done and how they need to be done.
So, great. I'm just noticing here, Sean, can you get rid of this in lieu of including healthcare and consumption taxes?
Sure. So just start with capital E extend as and the rest of it is in the box there.
Yes, I think the rest of it's fine.
Okay.
All right. We add this, someone add this? Can't tell. Responses underlined. I guess we want that. Okay. All right. I think we did not suggest any changes to any of this. Oops. Okay.
Yep.
Once again, pulling healthcare out.
Yep.
And boom, that is that. Whew.
So I just wanted to, I think I told you this, Bram, but we got a comment from a legislator about this conclusion being very nice. I really appreciated it.
Nice to hear. Okay. I will stop sharing. And The other two docs we had were Deb's comments and our Deb's responses to public comment and my responses to public comment.
Right. And I think as Deb noted in hers, Deb took the approach of writing the comment after all of the comments to that topic. And Bram, you did them bullet by bullet. What I was thinking once I get Steve's is I'll combine them all, but I'll combine them as one response. So it'll be letter and then all of the responses. So in your case, Bram, I think it'll work fine. But if it's ever not clear what it was referring to, I'll just add an introductory phrase to that paragraph, like in regard to your point about X,
Right.
And so I think that should work fine, and then they'll all be on the same format with the way Deb did it, and then pulling in Steve. So I can take a crack at it that way once I get Steve's and send it all back to you, and we can look at that Monday.
You're putting a lot of pressure on me, Sean, to put it in the right format.
No, you put it in whatever format you want. I'll integrate it.
I'm
You can
ambivalent.
Graded it wrong. You can put all the pressure on me.
I'm ambivalent to the format. How's that?
So I guess we've got two big things left to look at. One is our responses to the public comment, and the other is kind of that set of 5 or 6 questions that I had.
Yeah, I think it may be better to start there, because it seems like that's the part that really would probably be helpful for all of you to talk through sooner rather than later.
All right, let's start there. Do you have that, or shall I try to?
I do have it here. Let me see. Should I kick it to? Yeah, I didn't post that. Let me see if I send it. I just emailed it to you, Sorsha. If that.
Let me go retrieve it.
Okay. And while that comes up, I can read the first one. I mean, I think actually the first one you actually just discussed was the question of perhaps due to COVID, if you should revise the timeline. You said maybe thinking that maybe we lay out over the next 4 biennia, and you talk about that a little bit. But I think Bram, with what you just suggested as far as that new paragraph, as well as the changes you made to chapter 2, that takes care of that first bullet.
Yeah.
And number 2 was the issue of addressing childcare more explicitly. And I know Deb also had thoughts on that, and you enumerated several bullets, which I think Sorsha will call up as soon as it gets to here. But it seemed like that was a big item for discussion.
Yeah, and I think one way we can approach it is to say that we had comment from the public in which we heard several times about the importance of childcare to individuals and families being able to work either at their home as in a remote job or going to a job outside the home, and that removing the barriers to work is helpful to the state's income tax base.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I would just further add that, how do I want to put this? Although that will help to broaden the overall tax base for the state of Vermont, it is an expenditure, not necessarily a tax expenditure, that is outside of the charge that the commission had to analyze. And I think we want to make it clear that we've looked at it. We can't specifically say what to do, but that we feel it should be addressed.
Yeah, I agree. I think we don't want to, I think it's beyond the scope of our commission to make a sort of formal recommendation that the state create statewide universal free childcare, which is sort of why I think appropriate for us to acknowledge that we heard this concern and that we recognize the effect of childcare. Specifically, I think if we stay focused on taxes, we're not liable to go wrong.
So the problem I had with this is where?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Be in chapter 5 where you talk about the transfer system. Would you work in a couple of paragraphs there?
So the chart that we show with the single mom and the 2 kids, childcare is the biggest issue.
So it could naturally go there. Yeah, I think that's probably a good place for it. I think it might also let's see, did I mention this? I was just thinking about the fact that Betsy Bishop at the Vermont Chamber has sort of explicitly had this lovely vision and goal of making Vermont the remote working capital of the world. And she has identified, I think, 3 big things that have to happen for that to happen. One of which is good broadband everywhere, another of which is affordable housing, and a third of which is good childcare. And I think I may have talked her into good local elementary schools also being
Good.
but it might. I think it'd probably be valuable for us to explicitly say when we talk about childcare, consistent with the Vermont Chamber of Commerce's priorities for supporting remote work. Just to acknowledge and express agreement with the Vermont Chamber. I think in the spirit of broadening the base of support for our report and lowering the rate of criticism.
And maybe also add, because didn't Let's Grow Kids also weigh in on that as well?
Yes.
Yes.
So if we're going to mention Betsy in the chamber, we should mention Vermont for Let's Grow Kids as well.
That's a good idea.
Okay.
So I guess the next question is, do one of you want to take a stab at incorporating that into chapter 5, or do you want me to take a stab at it and look at it together on Monday? However you want to do it is fine by me.
I don't think you've ever offered when we've said no.
All right. Well, I'm happy to take a stab, and you can all.
Thank you, Sean. That's really helpful. Okay, so Sorcha, I think we can scroll down to point 3 on that doc. Oh yeah, so we have talked about this. This is Representative Browning's accusation that we failed to draw the obvious conclusions from the statutory language. but we have addressed that, so we can go on to number 4, I think, right?
Yeah, I should just point out that I did write her. And a couple of days ago, and I haven't heard back from her. I also wrote the other person, Sean, I can't remember the Stratford Lister.
Yeah, Tim Denny.
Yeah. And I tried to explain, not being totally clear about his comment. I explained everything I could, but I haven't heard back from either one of them.
Okay, so we have addressed number 3. Number 4, should we address the opportunity raised by the Lake Champlain Chamber about the SALT workaround beyond what Steve did on page 104?
My answer to that is no. And Austin already knows that, because we've debated that a number of times. First of all, there's already talk in the legislature that this is going to, that they're going to lift it before it expires, but it does expire in 2025. So effective 1/1/2026. It's already gone at a federal level anyway. So and other practitioners similar to myself that I've talked to said it could have more, if you're doing it just for the SALT cap, it has more detriment than possibly good, because the SALT cap for the next 2 or 3 years, what happens if you go to sell your business and you can't take the 40% capital gains exclusion because it's not, your business isn't eligible for it because an entity level tax wouldn't allow for that. So my answer is, and I'll put my feet in the sand, my answer is no. I think we get, if we put that it was for the SALT workaround only or primarily for it, I think we'd get a lot more flack than read between the lines.
But Steve, didn't you at one point explicitly say we should look at this, but not just for the SALT workaround, but for,
yes,
but it doesn't seem to be in the version that I most recently looked at.
No, we said that with the entity level tax is there. Just what was removed was the discussion of the SALT workaround that would provide. But the entity level tax is there.
Right, but I wonder if you should, since people are wondering about this, if you should explicitly say, we want to look at this for its long-term viability and not just because of the SALT workaround, or not to address that.
I guess we could add something like that. Sean, if you could take a stab at that at the end of that recommendation. This, just saying the commission feels this is a long-term recommendation and not intended for short-term benefits.
That sounds good. And you're saying in the recommendation, so do it in both chapter 2 as well as there in
Correct.
Page 104. Okay. Yeah, we'll do.
And I guess after the comment in Senate Finance, you should spell out SALT rather than.
Sure.
Or yeah. So know what you're talking about.
Yeah, since it's now going to be back in there, yes, the state and local tax, the cap on state and local tax of $10,000.
Right.
All right. Point number 5. I think I've actually added this in the response to public comment, maybe. And Deb, you may have grabbed this language also, I think, right?
I did. I took it. Right. I thought, oh, this is perfect. I don't have to write it.
Okay. So we will address that. One question I had, we talked about moving teachers' healthcare out of the ed fund. Another thing that I've wondered about, and it's very late in the game here, but it seems to me the cost of special education, the additional cost for that also is more a social service cost than an education cost. And I wonder if that should be in the Department of Children and Families rather than in the ed fund.
I think that's worse than going down the healthcare rabbit hole.
Yeah.
There's a big controversy, and we just changed the way that we're paying for special education now. And we've had study after study about, how to do this, and there's federal money involved. My sense is we let the debate continue as it's going on.
All right, I'm happy. I'm very happy not to touch that one. Okay, 6 already incorporated in the comments, the changes we looked at already, and 7, I addressed that in the response to public comment as well, and I think the answer is no, it is not double taxation, and I sort of worked out some numbers, so I think we're through that. And it is now 3:33, and that leaves us with reviewing each of our responses to our parts of public comment for for Monday. And are there other things that we need to do on Monday, Sean, besides get through that?
I think that's it, unless anyone else has any substantive changes they want to make. I think that's all I have on my radar.
Yeah. Go ahead, Deb.
I just wondered, Sean, were you trying to pull together the comments, as you said, under each letter or something like that?
Yeah, Monday? Once I get Steve's, I'll try to pull that ahead
Okay.
of Monday's meeting, depending. I don't know what Steve's schedule. If he gets it to me, I can do that late Sunday night or early Monday morning, whatever the case may be, and get that to all of you. So there's something, a package to look at and review Monday.
So if anybody gets a chance to read through the comments, each other's comments ahead of time, that particularly reading through mine, I found, partly because I was like, I'm so overtired, but I just worry about being kind of snarky or something like that. And so if you can look through them with that in mind, I would totally appreciate it if you would tone things down if they got off base.
One understand.
Yeah, I think it's probably, and I don't know if you've had a chance to read each other's or read, Deb and Bram's prior. I think as far as the snark and the tone and those things can all work on and refine and probably find to do Monday, particularly since we're at time. I think the only part that would maybe be urgent for today would be if you read them and there was any sort of substantive issues that you felt should be discussed sooner rather than later. Other than that, I think we can probably wait till Monday.
Yeah, I mean, I looked through Deb's comments and didn't see anything that struck me either as wrong or as particularly snarky, although I am very sympathetic to the instinct to be a little short with some of these people.
I just wanted to bring up a couple of points from yesterday just for everybody to think about. One of the things that Representative Browning brought up was talking about trust funds. I just want everybody to be aware that many of the typical trust funds, the person that is receiving the money does not own that trust fund. So if they're able to take $80,000 a year from that trust fund, unless they get approval from an independent trustee, they get no more. And when they die, that goes to another generation, whatever's left. So they don't, it's not like, oh, well, gee, they have a trust fund, so they can go and they can raid the trust fund and pay more money. It's, it's a misconception. And I think it's a misconception that, as I hesitate to say, the trust fund babies kind of make you think that they're rich because I have a trust fund. But if you really peel back the onion, they have a stream of income for life, but that's it. So just want to make sure everybody, because that probably will come up again. That's something that, that I wanted. I almost stepped in, but I was afraid that was a rabbit hole that I didn't want to really go down, because then to try to explain to people on that call the concept of trust taxation and dynasty trusts and all that stuff, we'd still be there. So just be aware that that's, that was a misconception.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. But I think a lot of times when people think of people who are wealthy, they might lump those two together. But as you point out, it's very different. Somebody who has the means to go buy $1 million estate with cash and not have a mortgage, different than somebody that has a steady flow of income.
Yeah, $1 million in a trust fund, of which they get 35,000 a year, is very different than $1 million in your checking account.
Exactly. And if you're unastute enough to spend that whole $1 million on a piece of property and then can't afford to pay the property taxes on it afterwards, well, shame on you. But again, it's the ability, you look at it and you say, okay, that further cements our decision to go with the ability to pay based on actual income.
Yeah.
Now, one comment it's funny, I got a comment yesterday from a group of financial planners that had asked me a few questions about the report. And one of the financial planners said, well, I have a handful of millionaire clients that have set their income up so that they get minimal income. And they're getting a property tax credit via the HS 144. So it's happening now. What makes what we're talking about any different? Because people will find a way to get around whatever system we have. And the principle of a good tax structure is not to forethink everything that people could find a way to get around. It's to go with the principles that we went with. And that's, and I feel strongly that that's what we did. So.
Good.
Good. Okay. Well, let's plan on reconvening at 1 o'clock on Monday to do our what may be our final meeting, our final run through of response to public comment, and then it's off to the editing races for Sean and on the subject of handover, you're going to draft a transmittal letter, Sean?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And is handover your emailing the letter and the report or links to the president pro tem and the speaker and the governor?
Yeah, I believe so. Or the Secretary of Administration probably is where we've been sending pieces for the governor. But I assume that would be the case. But I'll confirm that with Steve Klein and the JFO team. But yeah, I think sending it to the pro tem and speaker and Secretary of Administration would be the process.
What about the actual people who appointed us?
We can certainly, I can certainly send it to them as well. I did send it to their, I sent the draft to their, personal emails a couple weeks ago. So we certainly can do the same thing after we post the final as well.
And are there ever any paper copies in existence?
That's a great question too. I believe with the last, so it's been 10 years since they did the last one, and there were a lot more paper everything 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I believe they did print, some versions that may be up to all of you. I believe there is space in the budget if you wanted to print, a certain number, if there was a destination for them, or if you want me to ask around to see if there's a need or a hunger for print copies.
Don, I would suggest that we poll the committees that the report is due to see if they want copies, and the copy room at the State House will assist us as well. And anybody
Perfect.
in JFO that would like some.
Perfect. Not seeing your face on there, Sorsha. I forget to ask you. Good to think. Oh yeah, I have no idea that question, but Sorsha does. So yeah, what Sorsha said. That sounds good.
Sorsha knows the answer. Yeah, I am making a very strong effort to get to zero paper, although I am failing as I look around my office here. But it might be nice to have a hard copy. I think my mother would appreciate a hard copy versus a soft copy. She tries to keep up with what her wayward children are up to.
Sounds good. Well, I'll work with Sorsha and team, and we'll figure out what the desire is for number of hard copies, and we'll tack a couple on. So so you and your mom and anyone else who wants one can have a couple.
We have copies that we can autograph for our fans. Excellent. Well, thank you all. Boy, as I said when we were on just before the meeting started, it feels like we're climbing up the head wall at the very end of the long hike to get to the summit. We hit the cliffs at the top, and it's a climb, but we're close. So let's keep climbing.
Okay.
With that, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned by consensus. Thank you all, and have a great weekend. And we'll